The nurse was giving a wealthy man an injection, but she accidentally mistook morphine for ordinary painkillers. As a result, the wealthy man had only 10 minutes left to live, because she had just injected him with 100 milligrams of morphine at once.
Messed up.
You gave me 100 milligrams of the good stuff.
That dose would be fatal even for an elephant, let alone a human. Terrified, she frantically searched through her medical bag, but she couldn't find an antidote. Seeing the nurse in a panic, the wealthy man actually tried to reassure her not to panic. But how could anyone not panic at a moment like this? If the wealthy man didn't receive treatment within 10 minutes, he would die of heart failure. What was even more terrifying was that 3 minutes had already passed. The nurse had no choice but to pick up the phone and call an ambulance. But the moment the call connected, the tycoon hung up. Since their estate was in the middle of nowhere, it would take at least 20 minutes for an ambulance to arrive. There simply wasn't enough time. The tycoon realized he was doomed. He quickly calmed Marta down and told her to remember every word he said from that moment on. Only by doing so could she clear herself of suspicion of murder. Besides, Marta's entire family were illegal immigrants. The tycoon didn't want to endanger Marta's family over this. After all, at his age, he'd lived a full life. Just then, there was a sudden knock at the door. The tycoon told Marta to turn around immediately and pretend nothing had happened. It turned out his daughter-in-law had heard the noise and had come upstairs to check on the situation. When she saw that the tycoon was unharmed, she turned around and left, relieved. Since the tycoon now had only 4 minutes left, he told Marta to leave immediately, but to be on the safe side, he instructed her to drive away from the estate and then return as quickly as possible. Only by taking the back roads could she avoid the surveillance cameras. She was to enter through the small gate in the backyard. Although there were 2 dogs in the backyard, they knew her and wouldn't bark. She was then to climb up to the 3rd floor of the estate, climb through the window into my room, finally change into my pajamas, deliberately walk downstairs so my son downstairs can see you, then quickly return to my room, finally leave the estate the same way you came. This way, her alibi would be perfectly established. The next day, when the nanny went to wake the tycoon, she discovered a horrific scene in the room. The tycoon had died on the sofa. When the police arrived at the scene, a private detective suspected the case wasn't that simple. He had been hired by a mysterious figure for a hefty sum to investigate the truth behind the tycoon's death. The detective then questioned everyone at the estate. It turned out that night was the tycoon's 85th birthday, so his sons and daughters-in-law were all at home. This meant everyone was a suspect, so the detective interviewed each of them separately. However, each person shifted the blame onto someone else. It was clear that the tycoon's sons were troublemakers. They had been embezzling his money even before his death, and they seemed overjoyed after his passing, because it meant they could inherit his fortune. But when the detective asked about the female nurse, who had last been in contact with the tycoon on the night of the incident, everyone suddenly gave the same story. Marta was a private caregiver hired by their father, who had been at his side for several years. They all treated Marta like family. Moreover, in the hours leading up to their father's death, Marta had already finished her shift and driven home. However, observing the family's reactions, the detective sensed that none of them were telling the truth. He had no choice but to focus his investigation on Marta, because upon further inquiry, the detective learned that Marta had a physical condition that caused her to vomit uncontrollably whenever she lied.